The pump was pulling air when I drove out that last Thursday morning, and a man I had never spoken to was already dead in the ditch at the end of Miller Creek Road, though I wouldn't know that for another 6 hours. I want to start there, because that's the detail that stayed clean in my memory, and most of what came after has gone soft at the edges, the way a photograph does when you leave it in a drawer too long. It was a sound I knew wrong, that hollow knocking, the kind a submersible pump makes when the water table drops out from under it and it starts chewing on nothing. I pulled the truck off the gravel shoulder and sat with the engine running and listened to it for a while before I even climbed out. September in the Flint Hills, western Kansas, out past Cassoday where the grass runs to the horizon in every direction and the only thing taller than a fence post is a grain elevator. My wife Diane had made me a thermos of black coffee and a tin foil packet of leftover brisket, and the brisket was still warm against the passenger seat when I stepped down onto the caliche. I had bought the Dunmore well service route on August 31st. 9 days before it. I'm going to call it that, 9 days before it, because the other words feel borrowed from people who weren't there. The route was 11 irrigation wells, 6 stock wells, 2 municipal service contracts, a 1987 Ford service truck with a bad U-joint, a set of pipe wrenches older than me, and a customer list that hadn't been updated since 2014. I paid $22,000 for the whole mess. The previous owner, Harlan Dunmore, who'd run the route for 31 years and whose hands looked like old saddle leather, didn't cry when he signed. He just sat very still for a moment and looked out the window of the title office at the parking lot, like he was memorizing it. My wife thought I'd lost my mind. I had spent 19 years as a pump and well technician for the county rural water district, and I wanted finally one route that belonged to me. The knocking that morning was the Ferris Place well. I knew it before I got the hatch open. I walked the pad first the way Harlan had showed me. Pressure gauge on the holding tank. Check. Discharge line. Dry on the outside, which meant no sweating, which meant the water temp was already dropping, which was wrong for September. I crouched down and put my hand on the casing cap and felt the vibration through my palm. That hollow knock 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 that means the pump is pulling column, not water. There was something on the drop pipe when I pulled the well cap, a piece of duct tape folded over on itself, stuck to the inside of the casing like somebody had pressed it there in a hurry, with my name on it in marker. Raymond. That was my name. Raymond Pruitt, and the only person who knew this well enough to leave something inside the casing was Harlan Dunmore, and I had not spoken to Harlan since the closing. I peeled the tape off, unfolded it. It said in Harlan's cramped block lettering, Raymond. The Ferris tank has a secondary, underground cistern. Access is the storm cellar behind the machine shed. Combination July 14th, 33. Don't ask me why I never told you. You'll understand when you see it. HD. I stood with that piece of tape in my hand for a long time, looking at it, looking at my name on it, folded it once and put it in the breast pocket of my shirt, and I went back to the pump problem, because the pump was a problem I knew how to think about, and the cistern was not. The radio cut out while I was pulling the drop pipe. It shouldn't have. I run a little Bluetooth speaker on the tailgate when I'm working, gets a signal off my phone, and my phone had 4 bars of LTE out here, which was unusual but not unheard of. The Ferris Place sits on a little rise, catches the tower out of Matfield Green. It didn't fade the way a weak signal fades, it just stopped, mid-song, the way a power outage stops a clock, immediate and total. I looked at the phone, no service, which was strange. 4 bars gone to nothing in the time it took me to turn around. I tried a call to Diane, nothing. Tried the office line for the water district, nothing, not even a busy signal, just that empty digital silence that smartphones make now instead of a real tone, a silence that feels different from regular no-service silence, more like the line is there and something has just decided not to use it. I put the phone in my pocket and went back to the drop pipe. You can't rush a submersible pull on a 280-foot well by yourself. The pipe comes up in 20-foot sections and each section has to be broken at the coupling and stacked, and you do it hand over hand with a pulling bar, and if you rush it you strip a coupling 40 feet down and then you're into a whole different kind of morning. So I worked slow, and I thought about Harlan's note, and I thought about why a man who ran a well route for 31 years would leave a secret cistern in his paperwork, and I thought about why he would put my name on a piece of duct tape and stick it inside a well casing sometime between the closing and this morning. The pump came up at 10:40. The impeller housing was cracked, stress fracture, clean line across the bottom of the volute. The kind of crack that happens slowly over months and then one morning it's just done. I had a spare impeller housing in the truck. I always carry one. Harlan's habit. One of the good ones he left me along with the wrenches and the bad U-joint. I was threading the new housing when I heard the first siren. One siren, south, the direction of Cassoday, which had a volunteer fire department and one sheriff's deputy who covered about 900 square miles and whose name was Carl Reuter and who I had gone to school with and whose wife made the best pecan pie in Chase County. One siren is a thing you note and then go back to work. Two sirens is a thing you stop and listen to. What I heard by 11:15 was something I don't have a number for. Not sirens exactly anymore. More like, the sound underneath sirens, the way a bad storm sounds not like wind but like pressure, like the air itself is doing something wrong. I put the tool down. I stood up. I looked south toward the road. The smoke was already there. I just hadn't been looking for it, a column of it, black-gray, rising out of the direction of the highway, thin at the base and spreading at the top the way grass fire smoke does. But grass fire smoke is brown. This was darker, the color of burning rubber or plastic, the color of things that aren't supposed to burn. I tried the phone again. Nothing. I got in the truck. I drove to the end of the Ferris access road. I stopped at the gate and looked both ways on Miller Creek Road. There was a county truck, a green Department of Transportation truck, sitting in the middle of the road about 200 yards west. Not pulled over, not parked, just stopped, in the driving lane, with the door open, and a coffee thermos on the road beside it that had rolled up against the center stripe. I sat in my truck for what my watch said was 8 minutes, watching that green truck, watching the thermos. Nothing moved. I turned around and drove back up the Ferris Road and I parked behind the machine shed and I sat on the running board and I thought about Harlan Dunmore's note in my shirt pocket. And I thought about the cistern. And I did something I am still not entirely sure I can explain. I pulled out my notepad, the little wire-bound one I use for service logs, and I wrote down everything I could see, the smoke column bearing and approximate height, the time the phone signal died, the position of the green truck, the coffee thermos on the centerline, the direction the door was hanging open. I wrote it all down in the order it happened with the times next to it. Because I am a well technician, and a well technician is a man who reads a system, who looks at pressure and output and temperature and vibration and understands from those numbers what he cannot see. And I did not know what I was reading yet, but I knew I was reading something. The machine shed at the Ferris place hadn't been used in at least 2 years. I could tell from the mud dauber nests on the header and the way the big sliding door had settled into the sill. I had to lift and pull at the same time to get it moving. Inside it smelled like old diesel and cut metal and something else. Something faintly biological, the way a well pit smells sometimes when the water has been sitting. Organic, like the ground itself breathing. The storm cellar was in the back corner, exactly where a storm cellar in a machine shed should be. A steel hatch flush with the concrete floor, painted the same gray as the floor so that you'd miss it if you weren't looking for it. The combination lock was a Brassmaster. Old, the kind with a dial instead of a shackle. July 14th, 33. It opened on the first try. I pulled the hatch and the smell hit me, not bad, not rot, but old and mineral, the way deep water smells, the way an aquifer smells when you first perforate a new casing and the pressure releases and the rock water comes up for the first time in maybe 10,000 years. I went down on a wooden ladder, 8 rungs, into a concrete room maybe 12 feet square. The cistern itself was a tank, a big one, fiberglass, 6,000 gallons at least, plumbed with a hand pump on the outlet and a float valve on the inlet that connected to a roof collection line I hadn't seen from outside because it ran under the eave. But it wasn't the tank that stopped me. It was the shelves along the east wall. 3 of them, plywood on angle iron, floor to ceiling. Cases of water, cases of canned food, a plastic tote labeled medical in red marker, 2 5-gallon fuel cans, a hand crank weather radio still in the box, a bolt-action .243 in a soft case leaned against the wall, a box of shells on the shelf above it, a first aid kit the size of a milk crate, and in the center of the middle shelf, sitting alone, a green 3-ring binder with a strip of masking tape on the spine. The tape said, "For the next one." I sat down on the concrete floor with the binder in my lap. The first page was a letter from a man named Gerald Ferris, who had owned this land from 1961 until his death in 2019. Written in a hand that shook a little at the ends of words the way old hands do. And it said, I served in Korea as an infantryman and I came home in 1953 and I built this cistern in 1971 because I had decided after Korea that a man who owns land is a man who is responsible for the people on that land, and that responsibility does not end when the emergency does. Whoever you are reading this, the water in this tank is good. I've had it tested every 3 years since 1971. The hand pump on the outlet is a Bison. Parts are available. The rifle is a Remington 700 in .243, and there are 4 boxes of shells on the shelf. I hope you never need it. Use it if you do. Do not apologize for surviving. I read that letter twice. Then I closed the binder, climbed back up the ladder, locked the hatch behind me, and I did not tell anyone about that cellar for 4 days. The pump was back in the hole by 1:30. I know because I wrote it in the service log the way I always do. Time in, time out, parts used, observed conditions, and under observed conditions I wrote, phone service down since approximate 10:20. Smoke visible to south. DOT vehicle abandoned Miller Creek Road. No contact with district or personal. I wrote it like a log entry because that's what it was. I drove back to the gate at the end of the Ferris Road. The green truck was still there. The thermos was still against the centerline, but now there was something else. A person, on the far side of the road, in the bar ditch, sitting, with their knees up, wearing a DOT safety vest that was the wrong color now, more dark than orange, and their head was down in a way that wasn't sleep. It was the posture of a person whose body has stopped arguing with gravity. I sat in my truck with the window down for a long time. The wind was out of the southwest, carrying that burning plastic smell, and underneath it something else. Something I didn't have a name for yet, but that made the hair on my arms stand up in the atavistic way that body hair has stood up on frightened mammals for a very long time. The person in the ditch raised their head. They looked at my truck. I have thought about that look more times than I can count, and what I can tell you is that it was not the look of a person who needed help. It was not the look of a person who was afraid. It was not the look of a person who was anything I had a word for. It was the look of a thing that was deciding. I put the truck in reverse and backed up the Ferris Road to the machine shed, and I parked facing out with the engine running. And I sat there for a long time, and I thought about Gerald Ferris, and I thought about Korea, and I thought about a man who builds a cistern in a shelf and puts a rifle on it and writes a letter to a person he will never meet. And I thought about the words "do not apologize for surviving." And I thought, Harlan Dunmore knew. Harlan knew before I did. He knew before anybody. And he left me his route and his wrenches and his bad U-joint, and he left me his note inside a well casing where nobody would find it but me. And I thought, I need to find Harlan. My name is Raymond Pruitt. I am a well technician. I have been servicing pumps in the Flint Hills for 19 years and I know 11 things very well. I know pressure and depth and casing and yield and drawdown and static level and pump curve and amperage and vibration and rust. And the 11th thing I know is this. When a well runs dry, you don't abandon it, you go deeper. I got out of the truck. I went back into the machine shed. I opened the hatch. I went down the ladder. I picked up the green binder, and I started reading. The binder had 41 pages. Gerald Ferris was not a man who wasted words, but he was a man who understood systems, and what he had written was essentially a manual, not for survival in the abstract sense. Not the kind of thing you find on the internet written by men who have never been hungry, but a manual for this land, this specific quarter section of Chase County, Kansas, written by a man who had walked every inch of it for 58 years. Page 4 was a hand-drawn map of the property, pencil on graph paper, with water sources marked in blue, the main well, the cistern, a seasonal creek along the east fence line that he noted ran reliable through October in most years, a stock pond in the southeast corner that he said had never gone dry in his memory. Though memory is not a well and should not be trusted like one. Page 7 was a list of neighbors with their distances from the machine shed door, not addresses, distances. The Kaufman place is 1.4 miles northeast on the section road. They have a generator and a good dog. The Mercer family is 2.1 miles south on the highway. They have a root cellar under the barn. The old Spivey place has been empty since 2017, but the hand pump on the yard well still works and I oiled it in the spring. 12 names. with distances and what they had. At the bottom of that page in smaller writing, these are people who will help. They will want to know who you are and how you got here. Tell them Gerald sent you. Most of them will understand what that means. I read that page 3 times. I wrote all 12 names and their distances in my service log, because my service log was what I had and it was already full of distances and what things had. Page 12 was the one that stopped me. It was titled simply water, and it said, "The thing most people will run out of first is not food or light or safety. It is water. A human being needs 2 liters per day at minimum to survive, and the average person does not know where their water comes from or how to get more of it if the tap stops working. You are sitting next to 6,000 gallons. That is enough for 1 person for approximately 8 years or for 10 people for approximately 8 months. Share carefully. Share with people who can contribute something. Do not be ashamed of that arithmetic." Gerald Ferris knew it. Korea taught it to him. I closed the binder. I sat on the concrete floor of that cellar with the hand crank weather radio still in its box on the shelf in front of me, and I thought about Diane. Diane was in Emporia that morning, 61 miles northeast. She'd driven up the night before to see her sister Patty, who was recovering from a knee replacement. She was supposed to be back by 4 in the afternoon. I tried the phone again. Nothing. I looked at the weather radio in its box. I opened the box. The weather radio was a Midland, the hand crank kind with a solar panel on the back and a little fold-out antenna. I cranked it for 2 minutes and turned it on and worked through the 7 NOAA frequencies. 4 of them were silent, which NOAA frequencies are not supposed to be. One of them was broadcasting the standard emergency alert tone on a loop. The long one, no voice behind it, just the tone cycling over and over like something that had been set in motion and forgotten. One of them had a voice. A man, reading in a flat, careful tone. The kind of voice a person uses when they are trying very hard not to let their voice do anything. Residents of Chase, Lyon, and Greenwood counties are advised to shelter in place and avoid contact with individuals displaying erratic behavior or signs of physical distress. Do not approach. Do not attempt to render aid. Remain indoors. Lock exterior doors. This message will repeat. And it repeated, and I noticed that between the end of the message and the beginning of the repeat, there was a gap, and the gap was long, 6 or 7 seconds of pure silence, and the silence felt wrong in the specific way that broadcast silence feels wrong to a person who has spent enough time around radios, like the machine is waiting for something that isn't coming. The 7th frequency had nothing, and then, a woman's voice, not recorded, live, breathing wrong. If anyone is receiving this is Lena Marsh calling on weather frequency 7. I am at the Matfield Green Fire Station. I have 4 people with me including 2 children. We have water for 3 days. If anyone is receiving this, please respond on. And then it cut, not faded. Cut, the way a transmission cuts when someone lets go of a push-to-talk. I sat with the radio in my hands and looked at it. Matfield Green was 11 miles south. The smoke I had seen was in that direction. I cranked the radio for another minute and keyed through the frequencies again. Nothing from Lena Marsh, nothing live from anything, just the tone loop and the shelter-in-place message cycling in that long-gaped silence. I turned the radio off. I climbed up the ladder. I locked the hatch. I walked to the edge of the machine shed door and looked out at the Ferris access road and at my truck sitting with the engine off now because I had turned it off without thinking about it, the way you do a thing when your body understands something your mind is still arguing with. I walked to the truck. I got the service log off the seat. I turned to a fresh page. I wrote at the top, September 11th. What I know. And I listed it. Phone service, down since 10:20 a.m. Smoke. Visible south-southwest, bearing approximately 195, column approximately 400 feet, spread top, dark gray, petroleum origin probable. DOT vehicle, abandoned, Miller Creek Road, 1 occupant located in East Bar Ditch, ambulatory, behavior abnormal, did not approach. Weather radio, NOAA frequencies 1 to 4 silent, frequency 5 tone loop no voice, frequency 6 shelter-in-place advisory Chase, Lyon, Greenwood counties. Frequency 7 live transmission Lena Marsh Matfield Green Fire Station, 4 persons including 2 children, 3 days water, transmission cut 11:52 a.m. Harlan Dunmore, location unknown. Diane Pruitt, Emporia, Kansas, 61 miles northeast, last contact 7:14 a.m. I read the list back to myself. Then I added one more line. Gerald Ferris left a cistern. Harlan Dunmore knew to tell me about it. Someone has been thinking about this longer than I have. I found the Kaufman place at 1:20 in the afternoon. Not on the road. I went across the pasture on foot the way Gerald's map showed, through the gate in the north fence and northeast along the section line. 1.4 miles. I left the truck hidden behind the machine shed and I carried the .243 because I had thought about it for 10 minutes and then picked it up, and that was that. The Kaufman dog heard me before I was through the second gate, a big livestock guardian, white and blocky. It came to the fence and stood there and looked at me without barking, which is the kind of dog behavior that is either very good or very bad, and I stopped walking and let it look. A man came out of the farmhouse and stood on the porch with a shotgun broken over his arm. "You Gerald's?" he called across the yard. "Gerald's gone," I said. "Harlan Dunmore sold me the well route. He left me Gerald's note." A pause. "Come through the gate slow," the man said. "Brutus won't bite if you come slow." His name was Everett Kaufman, 63 years old, 4th generation on this land, and he had been on his porch since 7 a.m. when his hired hand Tomas had driven out to check the east pivots and not come back. His wife Rosemary was inside with their daughter-in-law Cass and Cass's 2 children, ages 4 and 7. Their son Derek was in Wichita and the phone had been down since 10. Everett had a generator, 2 actually, a propane standby and a diesel portable, and a chest freezer full of beef and a root cellar under the kitchen that had been there since his grandfather built the house in 1931. He also had a short-wave radio, a Grundig, old but functional, sitting on a shelf in the mudroom under a canvas cover. "Harlan told me about this place," I said. Everett nodded slowly. "Harlan told most of us about each other," he said. "Been doing it for years. Just introducing people. Stopping by. Making sure we all knew what everybody had." I looked at him. "He knew," I said. "Harlan's been knowing," Everett said. "Come inside." Rosemary made coffee. We got the shortwave up at 2:45. Everett knew what he was doing with it. He'd had his amateur license since 1987. Call sign KD0VFR, and he worked methodically through the 40-meter band the way a man works a fence line, section by section, listening before transmitting. The first thing we heard was a man in Cottonwood Falls, 17 miles north, saying his name on repeat and asking if anyone was receiving. Everett keyed up. "This is KD0VFR, Everett Kaufman south of Cassoday. Receiving you. What's your situation?" The man in Cottonwood Falls was named Burl. He had a hardware store. He had 7 people in his back stockroom. He had no water except what was in the toilet tanks and 2 cases of bottled water he'd pulled off the shelf when it started. He had 1 person who'd been scratched by something on the street that morning and whose arm was. Burl paused here. "Whose arm isn't looking right." Everett looked at me when Burl said that. I looked back at him. "Tell him about the Spivey well," I said. Everett did. He gave Burl the location, the distance from the hardware store, which roads to avoid based on what I'd seen on Miller Creek Road, and he told him the hand pump still worked and had been oiled in the spring. Burl went quiet for a moment and then said, "The person with the bad arm. What do I do?" Everett looked at me again. I was the one who'd seen the person in the bar ditch. I was the one who'd watched that head come up and seen what was in that face. I didn't have a word for it yet, and I still don't. Not really. But I knew what I'd felt looking at it, and I knew what that feeling meant. "Keep them comfortable," I said quietly. "Keep them separate from the others. Watch the arm." Everett relayed it. Burl said okay in a voice that was very small for a man with a hardware store. The line stayed open between us after that. Nobody transmitting. Just the carrier. That faint electronic breath that means someone is there. And I think neither Burl nor Everett wanted to be the one to let it drop. I went back to the mudroom and I sat on the bench where the boots were lined up under the coats, and I called Diane's name in my head the way you do a thing you can't do out loud. I had not bought her a birthday present yet. Her birthday was September 27th. I had a note on my phone that said, "D birthday. Get something good this year." The note was on a phone with no service on a phone tower that may or may not still be standing. I went back into the kitchen and I asked Rosemary if I could use a piece of paper, and she gave me a whole notepad, and I sat at the kitchen table and I wrote Diane's name at the top of the first page. And then I listed everything I knew about where she was, her sister Patty's address in Emporia, the make and color of the car she'd driven up in, the time she was supposed to leave to come home, the route she would most likely take. Highway 50 west to 177 south. That was her route. She'd driven it 100 times. She knew every grain elevator between Emporia and home. I wrote it all down because writing it made it a log entry, and a log entry was something I knew how to do, and doing something I knew how to do kept my hands from shaking. Then I went back to the shortwave and I asked Everett if I could transmit. "Go ahead," he said. I keyed up. "This is Raymond Pruitt calling on KD0VFR. I am a well technician located south of Cassoday, Kansas. If anyone receiving this is in or near Emporia and has contact with a woman named Diane Pruitt, green Honda Ridgeline, she may be traveling Highway 50 westbound. Please advise her to shelter and not to attempt the drive home." Repeat. Diane Pruitt, green Honda Ridgeline, Highway 50 westbound from Emporia. Please shelter. I will find you. Over. I let go of the key. The carrier hummed. A voice came back almost immediately, not about Diane. A woman in Strong City saying she was alone and had a baby, and her husband was a firefighter who had gone out at 6 that morning and wasn't back. I wrote her name down. Karen Solis. Strong City, baby, firefighter, husband unreturned. And I wrote her name in the log the way I wrote well service entries. Time, location, observed conditions. Because that was the only system I had, and a system, even an imperfect one, is better than no system when the ground has dropped out from under you. Everett made the first rule that evening. We were sitting at the kitchen table. All of us. Rosemary and Cass and the 2 children who were 4 and 7 and whose names were Marcus and Lily. And Everett looked around the table and said in the same voice he probably used at cattle sales, "We have water for a long time if we're careful. We have food for a shorter time. We have fuel for shorter than that. We do not have room for everyone who's going to want to come here, and we do not have the ability to turn away everyone who shouldn't." He looked at me when he said the last part. "So we make a list," he said. "People we call for. People we vouch for. People Gerald would have vouched for. And outside of that list we think hard before we open the gate." I nodded. Cass didn't look at anyone. She had her hands flat on the table the way a person does when they are holding themselves together from the inside. "My husband is in Wichita," she said. "Derek's on the list," Everett said immediately. "Derek's been on the list since the day he was born." She nodded and didn't say anything else, and that was the end of the first rule. That night I keyed the shortwave at 9 p.m. and I said, "This is Raymond Pruitt south of Cassoday on KD0VFR. It is Thursday evening. If you are sheltered and you have water and you have a way to receive this signal, stay where you are. I will transmit at the top of every hour. If you have a name you need read on the air, a person you are looking for, you can relay it through Burl in Cottonwood Falls or Karen Solis in Strong City, or come to Cassoday and find Everett Kaufman. We will read the name. That's all I can promise you tonight. Stay where you are. Keep your water clean. I will be here at 10. I let go of the key." Everett was in the doorway of the mudroom with his coffee cup. "You sound like you've done this before," he said. "I've read pump specs over the phone to guys who can't see what they're doing," I said. "Same thing." He smiled a little. The kind of smile a person gives when something isn't funny but it's the truest thing they've heard all day. "Get some sleep, Raymond," he said. "The wells will still need reading in the morning." Harlan Dunmore called the shortwave on day 3. Not the shortwave exactly. There is no phone line in this story that stays dead. What Harlan had was a CB radio in his shop. A Cobra 29 he'd used for 30 years to talk to truckers on the highway when the weather got bad. And someone in Cottonwood Falls had a CB with a SSB switch, and they bridged it to Burl's location, and Burl relayed it to us on the shortwave, and by the time the message arrived it had passed through 4 voices and lost some of its edges. But the core of it was Harlan's. "Raymond, I'm at my place. I'm all right. My neighbor Vic is with me. I know you found the Ferris Cellar because Vic's daughter drove past that morning and saw your truck on the access road. Don't come here. The highway between us is wrong. Use the wells. Raymond, use the wells. I read that message back to myself 3 times. Use the wells. I sat with it for a while. And then I understood. The well route, 11 irrigation wells and 6 stock wells across a spread of about 40 square miles. I had the locations of all 17 in my service log because I had driven every one of them in my first week on the route, mapping them the way Harlan had taught me. GPS coordinates and access road notes and gate combinations. They were not evenly spaced, but they were spread, and if you drew a line between them they formed something like a network, a series of points across the Flint Hills connected by section roads and pasture gates and the kind of small unnamed tracks that only show up on hand-drawn maps. Harlan had been servicing those wells for 31 years. He knew every access road, every gate combination, every shortcut across every piece of ground between Cassoday and his place out past Matfield Green. He was telling me that the wells were a map, and that the map was still good even when the highways weren't. Everett and I spread the service log on the kitchen table and I drew what I knew. 17 points across the map, connected by the routes I had driven, section roads mostly. Some pasture tracks, a couple of places where you had to open 2 or 3 gates in sequence, but if you knew the combinations you could move across the land in a way that never touched the highway at all. Rosemary stood behind us and looked at the map. Gerald knew the wells, she said. He used to say the wells were the skeleton of the county. Everything else was just the rest of it. Harlan knew it too, I said. Harlan learned it from Gerald, Everett said. Gerald taught half the well men in this part of the state. I looked at the map. If Harlan can get messages through Burl in Cottonwood Falls, I said, and if the Spivey Well is a point people can reach on foot from town, then we have the beginning of something. Beginning of what? Cass said from the doorway. A route, I said. A way to move people without the highway. She looked at the map for a long time. My husband is in Wichita, she said again. Wichita's too far for the well route, Everett said carefully. I know that, she said, and went back into the other room. Everett looked at me and didn't say anything, and I didn't say anything either because there wasn't anything to say that wouldn't make it worse. On day 4 the first person walked in from outside our list. A man, maybe 50, in a canvas jacket that had been good once and had been through something since. He came up the section road from the south on foot and stopped at the gate and held both hands open above his head the way people apparently understand to do even when nobody has told them to. Everett went to the gate with the shotgun. I stood back by the propane tank because Rosemary had suggested that morning that it was better if Everett was what people saw first. You look like the land, she'd told him. Raymond looks like he's from somewhere else. She wasn't wrong. The man's name was Phil Denker. He had been a shift supervisor at the wind turbine maintenance yard east of Cassoday. He'd been sleeping in the yard's break room for 3 days. He had no water left and had walked west because west was away from the highway. He'd heard my transmission on a handheld radio that one of the turbine techs had left in the break room. You said come to Cassoday and find Everett Kaufman, he said. I had said that on day 1. It felt like something I'd said in another life. Everett looked at the man for a long time. You been bit or scratched, he said. No, said Phil. You sick, said Everett. Thirsty, said Phil. Just real thirsty. Everett opened the gate. That night Rosemary made a rule about intake, 3 questions before the gate opened. Had they been in contact with anyone showing symptoms? Had they been scratched or bitten by a person in distress? Did they understand that the decisions made at this location were Everett's and that they would abide by them? Phil answered yes, no, yes in a voice that had been through something and was still mostly intact. He turned out to know how to weld, and how to run a generator properly, and how to dress a deer, which in the following weeks became 3 of the most valuable things a person could know. The question of what was happening came up on day 5. Not in a dramatic way, not with a theory or a name for it. It came up the way practical questions come up between people who are busy surviving, which is quietly and sideways and usually from the children. Marcus, who was 7, asked me while I was checking the generator oil. Mr. Pruitt, Are the sick people dead? I looked at him. He was a serious-faced kid. The kind who asks the actual question instead of the question around the question. Some of them are, I said. The ones that aren't dead, are they going to get better? I thought about the face of the person in the bar ditch, the way that head had come up and looked at my truck, that specific quality of attention. I don't know yet, I said. I'm still reading the data. He nodded like that was a reasonable answer. My dad collects data, he said. He's a chemical engineer. Then he knows how important it is to get the numbers right before you draw a conclusion, I said. Marcus thought about this. He's in Wichita, he said. I know, I said. He's on the list. The boy looked at me for a moment. What list? The list of people we're looking for, I said. The names we read on the radio. Oh, he said, and went back inside. I finished checking the generator oil and wrote in the service log, Day 5. Fuel consumption running 20% under estimate. Kaufman Root Cellar inventory. 14 cases canned goods, 90 pounds dry beans, 40 pounds cornmeal, 200 pounds potatoes. Cistern at Ferris Place untouched. Need to assess Spivey well hand pump output before committing it as a waypoint. Note, children are reading the situation accurately. Do not condescend. On day 6, I drove the well route for the first time since it started. Not on the highway, across the pastures the way Harlan's note had pointed me toward, gate to gate, section road to section road, the .243 in the rack behind the seat and Phil Denker riding along because he knew machinery and I wanted a second set of eyes. I checked 4 wells that day. 3 of them were running fine, the pumps pulling clean, the pressure tanks holding. The livestock at 2 of the locations were still alive and in reasonable condition, which meant someone had been there in the last couple of days, which meant we weren't the only people operating in the county. The 4th well was the one out past the Mercer place on 177. The Mercer family was on Gerald's list, Root Cellar under the barn. Gerald had put a star next to their name and written good people, which in Gerald Ferris's economy of language I had come to understand meant something close to extraordinary. I pulled into the Mercer yard and a woman came out of the barn with a pitchfork and held it across her body and looked at my truck. I got out slow with my hands open. Raymond Pruitt, I said. I'm on the well route. Gerald Ferris sent me. The woman was maybe 60, gray hair cut short, face that had been outside in Kansas weather for a long time. She looked at me without moving for a full 10 seconds. Gerald's been dead 2 years, she said. Yes, ma'am, I said. But his note wasn't. She lowered the pitchfork an inch or 2. You better come in, she said. Her name was Vivian Mercer. Her husband Raymond, same name as me, had died in 2021. She had her son-in-law Gus and her daughter Tess and Tess's baby. 4 months old and very small and very quiet in the way babies get quiet when things are wrong. The baby's name was Clara, and Clara was not eating well. And Tess was not eating well because she was not sleeping well because Clara was not sleeping, and Vivian had been awake for most of 6 days trying to hold all of it together with a pitchfork and a root cellar and whatever Gerald Ferris had left behind in the way of inheritance. I looked at the baby. I am not a medical person. I know water tables and pump curves and pipe threads. But I had also raised 2 kids with Diane and I knew what a baby looked like when it was struggling, and this baby was struggling. I got on the shortwave that evening back at Kaufman's and I described the baby's symptoms to anyone who would listen. A woman came back, a retired ER nurse in Cottonwood Falls named Dolores who had been sheltering at Burrell's hardware store. She asked me 6 questions and I relayed the answers, and she said the baby needed more frequent feeding and warmth and tell the mother to eat something even if she doesn't want to. I relayed all of it back through the chain of voices. And then I said on the open frequency, this is Raymond Pruitt on KD0VFR. There is a 4-month-old baby at a location on the well route south of Cassoday. She is alive. Her name is Clara. If anyone listening is named Mercer or knows the Mercer family near the Highway 177 turnoff, Clara is alive and she is being cared for. The frequency was quiet for a moment. Then a man's voice, young, breaking a little at the edges. This is Jake Mercer calling in from Emporia, Kansas. Did you say Clara Mercer? Is her mother Tess? I keyed up. Yes. Both alive. Both at the family property. A very long silence. Then, I've been trying to get home for 6 days. Every road I've tried. Don't take the highway, I said. Write this down. I'm going to give you the well route. And I did. I read it to him from my service log, gate combinations and section road numbers and the landmarks you watch for when the road signs are gone or wrong, the cottonwood tree at the corner of the Harrington section, the rusted water tower you pick up 3 miles before the Spivey well, the smell of the Ferris place before you see it, the specific color of the gravel on the Kaufman access road at dusk. I read it twice. He said I've got it in a voice that was trying very hard to be the voice of a man who had it together. Jake, I said. Drive at dawn. Stop at the Spivey well and drink. It's clean. Hand pump on the north side of the casing. Don't stop on the highway for any reason. When you get to Kaufman's you'll see the white dog at the fence. Stop the car and let him look at you. He's friendly if you're slow. Okay, he said. Clara's going to be all right, I said. She's eating. The line was quiet, and then he said thank you in the smallest voice I have ever heard from an adult man. I let go of the key. Everett was in the doorway of the mudroom with a look on his face I hadn't seen before. Raymond, he said. I think you just figured out what this is. What? I said. The wells, he said. It's not just water. It's the whole thing. It's how we find people. It's how we move them. It's how we talk to each other. I looked at the radio, at the map on the kitchen table with the 17 points and the lines I'd drawn between them. Gerald knew, I said. Gerald always knew, said Everett. He just needed the right next person. That night I keyed the frequency at 10 p.m. and I read 14 names. People who had been called in through Burl or Karen or the Mercer relay or just spoken into the air by strangers who had nowhere else to put them. I read each name twice, first name, location, last known. The way a well log reads, methodical, clean, no drama because the names were drama enough. And at the end I said, this is Raymond Pruitt on KD0VFR south of Cassoday, Kansas. The well route is open. If you know where you are and you know what direction Cassoday is, head that way and stop at any well you find along the way. The water is clean. The route is real. I will be here at the top of every hour. I let go. The carrier hummed. Everett turned the squelch down a little and the static came up, and underneath the static was something that might have been another voice or might have been the night wind moving through the antenna wire on the roof, and I chose to believe it was a voice. Because that's the kind of choice you make on day 6 when you are a well technician who has become something he doesn't have a name for yet. Trying to read a system that nobody built and nobody understands, and that is failing in every direction except the one you're looking at right now. The one you're looking at right now is still up. And up is enough. Jake Mercer made it in on day 8. He came up the Kaufman section road at 6:40 in the morning in a gray Subaru with a cracked windshield and a back seat full of things he'd grabbed in a hurry. 4 gallons of water he hadn't needed because he'd stopped at the Spivey well the way I'd told him. A duffel bag, a toolbox, and a car seat that was empty and that he looked at in the rearview mirror for the whole last mile of the drive because he'd put it there 6 days ago for Clara, and Clara had been born in February, and he had never gone this long without seeing her. Brutus heard the car before we did. I was already at the gate when Jake got out. He was maybe 30, unshaved, eyes that had been awake for too long. He looked at me and said, Raymond Pruitt? And I said yes, and he put his hand out and I shook it, and he held on for a second longer than a handshake usually goes. The well at the Spivey place, he said. There was a family there. A woman and 2 boys. They'd found it on their own. They didn't know about the route. I looked at him. What did you tell them? I said. I told them about you, he said. I gave them the rest of the directions. I hope that was all right. I wrote it in the log. Day 8. 6:40. Jake Mercer arrived Kaufman location. Subaru. Good condition. Reports family of 3 at Spivey well, unknown to network, given directions. Follow up. It's all right, I said. Come meet the dog. The family from the Spivey well arrived that afternoon. A woman named Sandra Ochoa and her sons Mateo, who was 13, and Rios, who was 9. They had walked from Cottonwood Falls over 2 days. Sandra had heard my transmission on a hand radio she'd found in a drawer at the motel where she'd been cleaning rooms when it started. She'd written the name Everett Kaufman Cassoday on her arm in ballpoint pen and walked toward it. She had worked as a water treatment technician for 6 years before the motel job, which meant she understood filtration and contamination and chemical dosing and testing in a way that none of the rest of US did. Within 2 days she had tested the cistern at the Ferris place with a kit from the medical tote, tested the Kaufman stockwell, tested the Spivey hand pump, and produced a written report on a piece of notebook paper that she handed to me and Everett like she was submitting it to a supervisor. Ferris cistern. Good. Kaufman well. Good. Slight iron. Safe. Spivey pump. Good. Pull speed suggests the water table is dropping slightly. Recommend weekly monitoring. I looked at that report for a long time. Sandra, I said, you're the most important person who's come through that gate. She looked at me like I'd said something mildly strange. I just know what I know, she said. That's all any of us are, I said. The trouble with the man called Aldrin started on day 10. He had come in on day 7, alone, in a pickup truck that was too clean for someone who'd been surviving for a week. He'd answered the 3 questions at the gate correctly, and Everett had let him in because his answers were right and his hands were steady, and he said he'd been a county road supervisor, which meant he knew the section roads and the equipment yards and where the fuel was stored. Which was true. He did know all of those things. What he also knew was how to listen. I noticed it first on day 9, the way he positioned himself near the shortwave in the evenings, not operating it, not asking to transmit, just listening, with a look on his face that was too still, the way a person looks when they are cataloging rather than hearing. On day 10 he asked Everett how many people were at the location. Everett said, enough. Aldrin said, I'm just asking because of resource planning. Everett said, I do the resource planning. Aldrin nodded and smiled and went back to the bunk room Phil had set up in the machine shed. That night, I sat with Everett at the kitchen table after the others were asleep. He's counting us, I said. Everett was quiet for a moment. I know, he said. He's counting the fuel and the water and the food, I said. He asked Rosemary how much propane was in the tank. I heard him. I know, said Everett. There are other people out there doing the same calculation we're doing, I said. Except they're doing it from the outside. Everett put his coffee down. Raymond, he said. I've been thinking about this since day 3. A location with water and fuel and a radio. That's not invisible. You put it on the air every hour. You tell people where to find Everett Kaufman. That's the right thing to do for the people who need water. It's also the right thing to do for the people who want what we have. I looked at the map on the table. I'll change the language, I said. Starting tonight. I stop giving directions to this location. I give directions to the wells instead. The wells are the network. This place doesn't have to be the center of it. It already is the center of it, Everett said. Not if we spread it out, I said. If the Mercer place is a node and the Spivey well is a node and the Ferris cistern is a node, then there's no single point. You take one of them and you don't take the network. You just take a well. Everett looked at the map for a long time. Gerald would have liked you, he said. I keyed the frequency at midnight. This is Raymond Pruitt on KD0VFR. Starting tonight, the network has changed shape. There is no central location. There are 17 wells across the Flint Hills between Cassoday and Matfield Green. Each one is a point. Each point has water. Move between them. Help the people you find at them. Relay names through the nearest contact point. This is not a place anymore. This is a route. If you are on the route, you are in the network. Over. I let go. The carrier hummed. 3 voices came back inside of 10 minutes. One from Burl in Cottonwood Falls. One from Dolores, the nurse who had moved from the hardware store to a farmhouse east of town with a family who'd taken her in. And one from a man I had never heard before who identified himself as Henry Stroud, calling from a ranch outside of Matfield Green, who said he had a working well and a working truck and had been waiting for someone to tell him what to do with them. Henry, I said. You're the South Anchor. I'm going to give you a list of wells between you and Cassoday. You are responsible for the south half of the route. Can you do that? A pause. I can do that, Henry said. What do I do if someone comes to my gate that I don't trust? 3 questions, I said. Been in contact with symptomatic individuals. Been scratched or bitten. Will abide by the decisions made at this location. If the answers are wrong, you send them away. If the answers are right and your gut says wrong, you listen to your gut. What if my gut is wrong, he said. Then you made a human mistake, I said, and you deal with what comes from it. There's no other kind of mistake available to us right now. Henry was quiet for a moment. All right, he said. I'm the South Anchor. I'll start in the morning. Aldrin left on day 11. I don't know if he left or if he was helped to decide to leave. I know that Everett had a conversation with him in the machine shed that morning that I was not present for, and that lasted about 20 minutes. And that when Aldrin drove out the section road heading north, his truck was exactly as full as it had been when he came in, and that Everett watched it go from the gate until it was out of sight. What did you tell him? I said. I told him we appreciated his road knowledge and that we'd put it to good use, Everett said. And I told him that a man who counts other people's food tends to make the people around him hungry. How did he take that? I said. He's a smart man, Everett said. Smart men understand when they've been read. I wrote in the log, day 11. Aldrin departed 9:15 northbound. Circumstances. Voluntary. Threat assessment. Reduced but not eliminated. Note, the radio makes us visible. Visibility is both the point and the risk. There is no resolution to this. Continue. Diane's voice came through on day 14. Not on the shortwave, on the CB relay through Burl. A woman in Emporia had a CB in her garage and had heard my transmissions about Diane relayed through 3 different voices over 2 weeks and had gone looking and had found her. Diane had been at Patty's house the whole time, 61 miles away. Patty's knee made evacuation impossible and Diane had stayed. They had water from Patty's well and food from Patty's pantry, and a neighbor named Kurt who came by every morning to check on them and who had a shotgun and a pickup and a fundamental decency that had gotten all 3 of them through 14 days without me. The relay message was short the way relay messages always are, stripped down to what survives 3 or 4 voices and a CB hop. Raymond. I'm here. Patty's okay. Kurt is helping. I know the route. Don't come yet. I'll come when I can bring Patty. I love you. Don't be stupid about anything. D. I read that message 6 times. Don't be stupid about anything was what Diane said to me every time I climbed a wind turbine or went down a deep pit or did any of the things that well work occasionally requires. It was her specific shorthand for I love you and I am terrified for you and I know you're going to do it anyway. I keyed the frequency that night and I said, Diane Pruitt is alive in Emporia, Kansas. She is at her sister's house. She is coming when she can bring her sister. Patty, if anyone in Emporia is relaying this to Patty's Street, your sister's husband says the well route is open and the water is clean and you are both on the list. Take Highway 50 west to the first section road south of the Chase County line. Stop at every well you find. The water is clean. I will be here. I let go of the key. I went outside and stood in the dark with the Kansas wind coming out of the southwest the way it always does, smelling like grass and distance and something burnt that had been fading for days but was still there underneath everything if you knew to look for it. And I allowed myself 30 seconds of something that was close to relief. Just 30 seconds, because that is all you get, and then you go back inside and you read the names. There were 22 names on the list that night. I read them all twice, first name, last name, location, last known. Any information that had come in through the relay. 3 of them had been found since I'd first put them on the air. Lloyd Tatum located at a ranch outside of Strong City. Maria Espinoza confirmed alive at the Mercer location. A teenage boy named Cody Harst who had been at a friend's house when it started and whose parents had been calling for 9 days found walking the section road between the Spivey Well and the Ferris place by Jake Mercer who was now running that section of the route in his Subaru. I said each name like it mattered. Because it did. And at the end, I said, 22 names on the list tonight. 3 found this week. If you are out there and you have a name to add, find a well. Someone at the well will know how to get it to me. The route is the thing. The route is the only thing. The hardest night was day 17. A man came to the gate alone on foot at 11 p.m., which was wrong because people who come at night usually come for the wrong reasons. Everett met him at the gate with a shotgun, and I stood back by the propane tank with a .243. The man's name was Denton Cole. He was maybe 45, and he had been scratched. He knew he had been scratched. He told Everett through the gate in a voice that was trying very hard to be calm. I know what it means. I'm not asking to come in. I just need you to write something down. Everett looked at me. I walked to the gate. The man in the dark on the other side of the wire was a middle school science teacher from Cottonwood Falls. He had a wife named Renata and a daughter named Sophie who was 11 and who he had put in a car with his wife's sister on day 1 heading for her sister's place in Abilene and who he had not heard from since. I need you to put their names on the radio, he said. Renata Cole. Sophie Cole. Abilene, Kansas. I need you to read them. I wrote the names in the log. How long? I said. I didn't finish the sentence. I can feel it, he said. Maybe a day. Maybe less. I've been watching it happen in other people and I know what the progression looks like. I looked at him through the wire. Is there anything else? I said. Tell Sophie, he said, and then stopped and started again. Tell Sophie her dad said the mitochondria really is the powerhouse of the cell. She'll know what that means. I wrote it in the log. I'll put it on the air, I said. Don't say how you got it, he said. Just say her dad said it. Okay, I said. He stood there for a moment. Is the water route real? He said. I heard it on a radio. I didn't know if it was real. It's real, I said. He nodded once, slowly. Good, he said. That's good. He walked back down the section road into the dark and I stood at the gate and watched until I couldn't see him anymore. Which was not very long because the Flint Hills dark is total and absolute and takes everything into itself with complete indifference. I went inside. I keyed the frequency. This is Raymond Pruitt on KD0VFR. It is late. I have names to read. I read them all. Renata Cole. Sophie Cole. Abilene, Kansas. And at the end, I said, Sophie Cole. If you are receiving this or if anyone who knows Sophie Cole is receiving this, her dad says the mitochondria really is the powerhouse of the cell. He says she'll know what that means. The frequency was quiet. And then Dolores, the nurse in Cottonwood Falls, who was 71 years old and had seen more than any of us and who kept her transmissions short and practical, keyed up and said simply, Raymond, you're doing good work. And let go. I sat with the receiver in my hand for a long time. Next hour at the top, I said finally, stay where you are. Keep your water clean. Harlan Dunmore came up the well route on day 23. He came the way I'd have expected him to come, in his old service truck, a white Ford with Dunmore Well Service faded on the door and a pull rack on the flatbed that had been pulling pipe since before I'd gotten my journeyman card. He came gate by gate, section road by section road, the way he had come 1,000 times before it, and he pulled into the Kaufman yard at mid-morning with a thermos of coffee he'd made somewhere along the route and a face that had aged about 8 years. In 23 days. He got out of the truck and looked at me for a moment. You found the Ferris Cellar, he said. Day 1, I said. He nodded. Something released in him when I said that, some held thing that had been waiting. I didn't know if you'd check the casing, he said. I knew you were the kind of man who checks the casing. But I didn't know. Why didn't you just tell me at the closing, I said. He looked at the ground for a moment. Because if I told you at the closing, it would have sounded like the ramblings of an old man who'd been alone on a well route too long, he said. But if you found it yourself, then you already knew it was real. I thought about that. Gerald teach you that too, I said. Gerald taught me everything. Harlan said, come on. Show me what you've built. What we had built by day 23 was something I still don't have the right word for. It was not a community exactly, A community implies permanence and a shared address and people who chose each other. This was more like a watershed, a system of connected points that moved things the way water moves, along the easiest available path, downhill toward where it's needed. The Kaufman place was the top of the watershed, the highest point in terms of resources and organization, but it was no longer the only point. Henry Stroud at Matfield Green had become the south anchor the way he'd said he would, methodically and without drama. He had 4 families at his location by day 23, and a network of 4 wells he personally serviced and monitored, and whose output he reported to me every morning on the frequency with the same flat precision that I'd used in service logs for 19 years. South Anchor. Day 23. 4 wells checked. All pulling clean. Mercer Place reports 2 new arrivals yesterday, both cleared intake. Spivey pump output down 4% from last week. Recommend weekly pull on the drop pipe to check for sand infiltration. I wrote it in the log and said copy that Henry, and felt something I recognized from my years at the water district. The specific satisfaction of a system that reads itself, that generates its own data, that tells you what it needs without being asked. Dolores had moved from the hardware store to a location between Cottonwood Falls and Cassoday, a farmhouse with a good well and a family named the Bertrams who had taken her in and who had discovered that having a retired ER nurse in their farmhouse was worth approximately 1 miracle per week. She had become the medical node of the network. People brought their questions to her through the relay and she answered them with the same brisk precision she'd used in an ER for 30 years. Wound showing streaks moving toward the trunk. That person needs to be separated and kept comfortable. Fever under 102 with no bite history. Fluids and rest, probably fine. Child not eating. Check hydration first. If lips dry and no tears, get them to me, or to the Mercer location where Tess can help. She's learned fast. Tess Mercer had learned fast. That was true. The woman who had been too exhausted to eat 6 weeks ago was now the closest thing we had to a pediatric nurse. She and Dolores talked through the relay every other day, comparing notes on the 3 infants in the network. Clara, who had found her rhythm, a baby at the Bertram location named Oscar who had come in with his mother on day 18, and a newborn, born at the Kaufman kitchen table on day 20 with Rosemary and Dolores talking. Phil and Everett threw it on the radio from 12 miles away because there was no time to get Dolores there. The baby's name was Gerald. Rosemary named him. She said it without asking anyone's permission the way Rosemary did most things. His name is Gerald, she said, and put him in his mother's arms, and nobody said anything else about it. I keyed the frequency that night and said, there is a baby boy born today at a location on the well route in the Flint Hills of Kansas. His name is Gerald. He is healthy. His mother is healthy. The well route is 23 days old today and it has a new member. The frequency was quiet for a moment and then voices came back, not with information, not with names or questions or relay traffic, just voices acknowledging the thing the way people acknowledge things that matter, short and simple and from everywhere on the network at once. Burl said, good news. Henry said, copy that. Dolores said nothing but keyed the transmitter for a second and let it breathe, and that was enough. Renata and Sophie Cole came up the well route on day 26. They had not been in Abilene. Renata's sister's car had broken down 40 miles short, and they had sheltered at a grain elevator outside of Harrington with 11 other people, and a farmer named Walt who had kept them alive on stored grain and 2 stock wells for 3 weeks until a man passing through on a tractor had told them about a radio signal out of the Flint Hills that read names at the top of every hour. They had walked the last 18 miles of the route in 2 days. Sophie was 11, thin, with her father's eyes and the careful, watchful face of a child who has been reading adult situations for weeks and understanding more than the adults knew. She sat at the Kaufman kitchen table and Rosemary fed her, and she ate with the focused efficiency of a person whose body has learned not to waste anything. I sat across from her. Your name was on the list, I said. Your dad put it there. She looked at me. She knew. In the way children know things before they're told. She knew from the way I said put instead of put, from the way her mother had gone very still in the doorway. He's gone, she said. It was not a question. Yes, I said. She was quiet for a moment, her hands flat on the table. Did he say anything? She said. He did, I said. He said the mitochondria really is the powerhouse of the cell. He said you'd know what that means. She looked at the table for a long time. Then she made a sound that was small and brief and complete, and Rosemary was next to her before it was finished. I went out to the machine shed and stood in the dark for a while. I wrote in the log, Day 26. Sophie and Renata Cole located and arrived via well route from Harrington direction. Both in good condition. Sophie is 11. She is on the list now as found. Denton Cole, removed from active list. Note, the list is not only for the missing. It is also for the ones who made it possible to find them. Diane arrived on day 31. She came the way I'd told her to come. Highway 50 to the Chase County line, then south on the section roads, in the green Honda Ridgeline with her sister Patty in the passenger seat. Patty's knee in a brace that Jake Mercer had found in the medical tote at the Ferris Cellar on one of his route runs and sent north through 2 handoffs. Brutus heard the truck first. I was at the gate before she'd stopped moving. She got out of the truck and she walked across the gravel and she put her forehead against my collarbone and she didn't say anything for a long time. And I didn't say anything. And the wind came out of the southwest the way it always does and Brutus sat down beside us like he understood that some moments require a witness. The wells were on the radio, she said finally. Every time I tried a road it was wrong. And then Kurt picked up your signal and he wrote down everything you said and I had the whole route in my handwriting before I left. Good, I said. You sound tired, she said. I'm all right, I said. She pulled back and looked at my face the way she has looked at my face for 29 years, reading it the way I read a pressure gauge, looking for what the numbers aren't saying. Raymond, she said. What did you have to do? Some things, I said. She nodded once. She has known me long enough to know when a word is the whole sentence. Tell me later, she said. When it's just us. Yes, I said. Harlan sat with me at the shortwave on the evening of day 31. He had stayed. I hadn't asked him to and he hadn't announced it. He had just begun to be present in the way that men who know a route are present, showing up at the right well at the right time, pulling up on a section road where someone needed a hand with a pump or a gate or a stuck coupling. He was 71 years old, and he moved like a man who had been working this land since before I was born because he had been. That evening he listened while I ran the frequency, the names, the situation updates. Henry's South Anchor report. Dolores on a child with a fever that had broken. Burl on 3 new people who had found the Spivey well on their own and asked to join the network. When I let go of the key after the names, Harlan was quiet for a while. Gerald would have done it different, he said. He would have had it all on paper. Maps. Printed lists. He didn't trust electronics. Electronics are what we have, I said. I know, Harlan said. But you should write it down too. All of it. The whole route. Every gate combination. Every well. What each location has and who's there and what they know. On paper. In a binder. I looked at him. In case the radio goes down, I said. In case the radio goes down, he said. In case you go down. In case I go down. In case 20 years from now somebody inherits this route and needs to know what it is. I thought about Gerald Ferris writing in his shaking hand. I hope you never need it. Use it if you do. Do not apologize for surviving. I thought about Harlan folding a piece of duct tape inside a well casing with my name on it. I thought about the specific faith involved in leaving something for a person you've never met. In building a thing and walking away from it and trusting that the next person will understand what it's for. I'll start tomorrow, I said. Start tonight, Harlan said. The wells don't sleep and neither does the water table. What I want to tell you, listener, is this. Today is day 41. The well route covers 37 miles of the Flint Hills from Henry Stroud's South Anchor to the Bertram Place north of Cottonwood Falls. It has 19 points now. 17 original wells plus the Ferris cistern and a stock tank at the Kaufman East pasture that Sandra tested and cleared on day 30. There are 63 people in the network. I know because I count them every morning the way I check a pressure gauge. By the names. By the locations. By what each person contributes to the system. Sophie Cole has started keeping the log. She asked me on day 30 if she could help and I said yes and I handed her the service log and she looked at it for about 30 seconds and said, Your handwriting is terrible, and I said I know, and she has kept the log since then in a hand that is even and clear, and that puts the times in the right column, and the observations in the right column, and the names in the right column without being told. She is 11 years old, and she has her father's eyes, and she is the most precise person I have met in 41 days of needing precise people. I told her what her father did, not all of it, but enough. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "He was a science teacher. He believed in accurate data. He gave me very accurate data," I said. "His data is why you're here." She thought about that. "I want to learn the wells," she said. "All of them. How the pumps work. How you read the pressure. All of it." "I'll teach you," I said. "First thing tomorrow." "Tonight," she said. "The wells don't sleep." I looked at her. Harlan, from across the room, made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Diane runs the name list now. She took it from me on day 33 without asking. She sat down at the table and she went through every slip of paper and every log entry, and she organized them the way she organizes everything. Alphabetical, with a column for date received and a column for date resolved and a column for notes. She reads the names at 9 p.m. every night in a voice that is clearer and steadier than mine. She has the radio voice that Walter Holcomb's Montana engineer never thought he had, warm and precise and human in all the ways that matter when a name is all someone has left to hold on to. She reads Denton Cole's name still, every night, not in the active list, in a different list she has made herself, a list she calls the ones who made it possible. She reads those names at the end, after the missing and the found, quiet and unhurried. She said to me on day 38, "Raymond, these names are how the route remembers who built it." "Yes," I said. "Promise me you'll keep reading them," she said. "I promise," I said. Harlan found the second binder. He was checking the Ferris Cellar on day 39, doing an inventory the way he did every few days, methodical, precise, and behind the footlocker on the bottom shelf under a piece of canvas he found another green binder, smaller than the first, with a strip of masking tape on the spine. This one said, "For whoever comes after the next one." Gerald Ferris had written 2 binders. The second one was shorter, 12 pages, and it was addressed to no one specifically, which meant it was addressed to everyone, and the first page said, "If you are reading this, then the first binder worked and the person I left it for found someone worth leaving it to. That is the whole design. That is the only design. You find the next person. You show them the well. You walk away and trust them with it. The water doesn't care who pulls the pump. The water only cares that someone does." I read that page to Harlan. He was quiet for a long time. "Gerald," he said finally, not to me, just out to the air, "the way you say a name when you want it to go somewhere. The propane at the Kaufman place is at 38%. The Ferris cistern is at 81% of original capacity, which means we are drawing less than Gerald planned for, which means Sandra's rationing protocols are working, which means numbers can save people just as surely as wells can. Baby Gerald is 6 weeks old. He has his mother's nose and his father's complete inability to sleep at reasonable hours, and he has never known a world that worked any other way than this one, which means he will grow up understanding the wells and the route and the names the way other children grow up understanding traffic lights and grocery stores, as the basic furniture of the world he was born into. I think that is the most hopeful thing I know how to say. The shortwave network reaches from Salina to Wichita now, not through us specifically, through the people who relayed our transmissions and built their own nodes and found their own wells. We are one point in a larger route that we did not design and cannot see the full shape of. Last week a voice came in from outside of Dodge City, 200 miles west, a woman, asking if anyone on the frequency knew the well route in the Flint Hills. Her nephew was somewhere between Cassoday and Cottonwood Falls and she had heard the network was real. I keyed up. "This is Raymond Pruitt on KD0VFR, I said. "The route is real. Give me your nephew's name." She gave me his name. I wrote it in the log, in Sophie's column, in her clear, even hand, and that night Diane read it at 9 p.m. along with all the others. 41 names on the active list tonight. 9 found this week. The water table at the Spivey well is holding. The Kaufman generator is running 4 hours on, 8 hours off. Henry Stroud at the South Anchor reports a family of 5 arrived yesterday having followed the well route from as far as Eureka, 60 miles. They arrived in good condition having stopped at 7 wells along the way and drunk clean water at every one of them. A girl in Dodge City is waiting for her nephew's name to come off the list. I will read it every night until it does. That is the whole design. You find the well. You pull the pump. You read the names. You trust the next person with the route. The water doesn't care who does it. The water only cares that someone does. This is Raymond Pruitt on KD0VFR. 7.245 MHz lower sideband, from the Kaufman Place in the Flint Hills west of Cassoday, Kansas. The route is up. My wife is in the next room going over the name list for tomorrow. Sophie Cole is asleep at the desk with her head on the service log, and I am going to let her sleep because she has earned it, and the log will be there in the morning. Harlan Dunmore is somewhere on the section roads right now checking the north wells the way he has checked wells in this county for 50 years. In the dark. By memory. Because the route doesn't sleep and neither does he. And Gerald Ferris, who built a cistern in 1971 because Korea taught him that the land is responsible for the people on it. Gerald is in the ground on his own property. But the water table under that ground is deep and clean and still rising. And we check it every week. Good night, listener. Stay where you are. Keep your water clean. I will be here at the top of the hour.